And we are going to continue on the theme of solar system anomalies here today. We've been talking in the past about various things, like for instance, Planet X catastrophe in the past, and how this might be linked with unknown bodies in and around our solar system, sometimes with the speculation of incoming things. But we have Walter Cruttenden with us today from the Binary Research Institute to talk about the possibility that we are actually living in a binary star system. And we're going to also talk about the cyclical rise and fall of civilization. The question here is if our sun basically has a companion. NASA even believes so. They call it the Nemesis. They're looking for it. A while back they released a news article yet again that they do kind of regularly about this weird phenomena. Seems to be a force out there, so to speak, which seems to support this particular theory. Walter is an amateur theoretical archaeoastronomer. He's been doing research on the celestial mechanics of the precession of the equinox, as well as myth and folklore related to this phenomena. He's also the author of Lost Star of Myth and Time, and there's a few websites here I want to give out to you guys as well. First, check out binaryresearchinstitute.org and also loststarbook.com. That's specifically more about the book Lost Star. Walter is also behind the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, CPAC. And now in May, he's going to head over to the European continent and doing a few talks in the UK, among other places at Megalithomania and another Conscious Awareness Expo or conference as well in the UK. And we'll talk more about this later on, give you guys a heads up on that. But with that, welcome to Red Ice Radio, Walter Cruttenden. We're very excited to have you on the program with us today.
Hey, Heinrich. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Really good to have you here. And why don't we begin just talk a little bit about your upcoming appearances over in the UK here now in May then. Megalithomania. We had the founder of that on our program before, Hugh Newman, and you're heading over there. Have you been there before, or is this your first time over there?
I've been to England several times, of course, but I've never been to the Megalithomania conference, so I'm looking forward to that. And that is on May 9th that I'll be there, but the conference runs through that whole weekend with events before and after it from May 6th to May 10th. So it should be pretty exciting.
Excellent. And then you have another one upcoming in London as well. Tell us about that.
Yes, a few days before, on May 6th at Conscious Events, and that's in London, 3 hours on the evening of the 6th. And so I think that can be accessed just through Conscious Events. You can Google that. I'm not sure the website offhand.
All right. We'll see if we can find that and link that up for the radio show as well. Something for you guys out there listening to check out if we're in the UK or around the area, and find the things that we'll be discussing here with Walter tonight as interesting, as it were. And so why don't we dive into it a little bit, Walter? Maybe you can just give us a brief little outline about yourself as well, when you got involved in studying some of these things, and what got you into it. That would be interesting to hear about that.
Yes, gladly. Heinrich, I work at the Binary Research Institute in Newport Beach, California, and that's where we study the motion of the solar system, its cause and consequences. And I'm actually sort of more interested in the consequences because of the ties to ancient knowledge, these cultures that talked about this rise and fall of civilization, and because we think it might be related to the motion of the solar system. And, just by way of background, I was always interested in astronomy and archaeology when I was a little boy. And so I've just constantly studied it. And even though my main career was in research of another nature, mostly of high-tech companies in the venture capital and investment banking business, when I retired from that, I got straight back to my research of astronomy and ancient cultures, and that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. And I must say that the discoveries that have been made in the last 10 years or so are just, sort of rewriting the history books, and also the discoveries in the areas of astronomy, too, seem to be going at a very fast pace. So
yes,
it's quite an exciting time to be in this business.
Absolutely. So many things are changing, and new things are coming online, so to speak, as well, all the time. For instance, there was a news release here by NASA. Was it yesterday? I think. Yeah, it was yesterday. By something they call First Light. This is the SDO, the Solar Dynamics Observatory. They managed to capture some incredible high-resolution images of the sun. Don't know if you've seen this yet. Are you aware of that, Walter?
It came into my inbox on the email, but I actually haven't opened it yet. So I look forward to reading that.
Absolutely, because obviously why I'm bringing it up is that if we indeed get very high detailed images of the sun and so forth, we might be able to see if indeed things are hanging around the sun as well. If we can see something in the background, depending on orbits and timing, of course, of all of this. We'll get into some of this later. But in terms of finding a brown dwarf or a companion to the sun, how likely do you think that is? Do you think we'll ever get a photograph of it, so to speak?
Well, if the sun has a brown dwarf companion, I'm sure in time that we would discover that, because our equipment is just getting better and better all the time. In my book, Lost Star, Myth and Time, I get into this idea that our sun might have a companion, and it is something that, mainstream astronomers have talked about as a way to explain, regular extinctions of dinosaurs and things like that. And so there is a group that's looking for a brown dwarf with a very long cycle phenomenon. And those people are at UC Berkeley, Richard Muller, as well as Whitmire and Matisse at the University of Louisiana and some others. But I'm more interested in a shorter cycle phenomena, which we can get into in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I'm really not so certain that it's a brown dwarf we're looking for. And that is one of the scenarios: a brown dwarf, maybe a red dwarf towards the galactic center, maybe even a black hole. Those are all sort of in the dark star scenario categories, versus there are some bright star categories, things that we see with our visible eye that we just have not observed carefully enough to realize that we are moving around it over a very long period of time.
And how long a period are we talking about?
Well, all our work indicates that what we call the precession of the equinox, where the stars move across the sky at about 50 arc seconds per year relative to the equinox, or another way of looking at it is the sun moves through the constellations of the zodiac at about 50 arc seconds per year, which means it takes about 2,000 years to go 30 degrees.
Yeah.
In other words, it's about 24,000 years to complete one precession of the equinox. It's actually running a little bit longer at its current rate because it'll speed up and slow down. But so the periodicity we're looking for is something that can explain the precession observable, because we do not think it's adequately explained by current lunisolar theory. As a matter of fact, there's quite a number of problems with the current theory that we've written papers on and getting some traction on.
And how did you how did you get awareness of this idea? Was it through observation? Does it has to do with the mythological record, or was it something else, Walter?
Yeah, it actually began more with reading ancient writings, because so many ancient cultures had talked about this phenomena of the stars moving across the heavens, which we call precession, and they tied the rise and fall of civilization to it. And it wasn't just one or two. It's now been documented that over 40 cultures have this common myth of a long-lost golden age that ages rise and fall. It's the Greeks term it the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age. The Indians call it the Yugas. Mayan, Hopi, other cultures have different names for it. But they all sort of tied it to a change in the heavens that we call precession. And so, it really began to bug me as being more than coincidence. It's mentioned in more than 200 myths.
Mm.
And so that's when we began to study it very seriously about 10 years ago or so, 8 years ago, and began to realize that the precession phenomena, where we, look on the date of the equinox and see the stars don't quite line up exactly like they did the year before,
Mm-hmm.
that is actually the observable of a solar system in motion rather than just a simple wobbling Earth.
Hmm. What is it with the precession that affects mankind and even civilization then? Is it a continuous a catastrophe that comes and goes, or what is it that affects it?
I don't think so. No, I don't think it's a big catastrophe at all. As a matter of fact, I think it's just simple, waxing and waning light. For example, Heinrich, we know that the cycle of day and night is very dramatic. It's driven by the Earth spinning on its axis, and when we face the sun, we're all in a waking state. Photosynthesis occurs. There's lots of activity on the planet, and when we face away from the sun, 99% of the population goes to sleep. Actually, goes into a subconscious state. So this simple little first motion of the Earth spinning on its axis changes consciousness. We go from waking state to subconscious state, every 24 hours. And again, the second motion of the Earth, it being on a slight angle, 23-degree angle as it goes around the sun, this Earth orbit has dramatic changes. It affects all plants. Trillions of plant forms spring out of the ground, bloom, and then give their fruit and decay again. Billions of other creatures will migrate or spawn or come out of hibernation, go back into hibernation. All these things are caused by celestial motions and a waxing and waning of light. So too, if there is a third motion, our whole solar system, going closer to and farther from another point, and stellar objects are huge emitters of electromagnetic spectrum, light, and therefore I think if it does have an effect, it would affect our ionosphere, our magnetosphere, and have profound changes just because of the waxing and waning of the electromagnetic spectrum.
It's known that our brain carries its own electromagnetic field, and do you think that might be the relationship here, that because of or depending on the activity on the sun, even our own awareness might go up or down, so to speak?
Yeah, I do. I think it's all tied together, and I'm not saying that we have really firm hypotheses yet on how this occurs, but there's a lot of anecdotal information. For example, SAD, seasonal affective disorder, is something, when they don't get enough light, people are affected here, and some people are very sensitive to it, and some aren't. And so, yes, this we are very sensitive to these changes in light, and they can affect our mood and even consciousness. Matter of fact, there's a gal at UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. She's a professor of physiology, a former professor, Dr. Valerie Hunt, and she wanted to see what effect it had on people when they were removed from the electromagnetic environment of the Earth. The Earth sits within a magnetosphere, and this magnetosphere is bent and warped by the sun every day. It sort of forms a teardrop shape around the Earth, with the short end of the teardrop facing the sun and the long end facing away. So it's always changing as the Earth spins. And so she took some patients. She put them in a room called the Mu room, and it's a Faraday cage where they use this room to make very sensitive electronic devices and to test electronic equipment when they don't want any interference from, television waves, microwaves, and cell phones, stuff that's running through the environment all the time. And it also even separates people in the room, if they're in there long enough, from the ambient electromagnetic cocoon of the Earth, if you will. And so she put them in there. She gave them tests to do. She wanted to see how people performed on the tests. But the really remarkable findings were, not only did people do a little poorly on the test after being in this room for long periods of time, but they actually cried. And so they described their feelings to the professor when they got out, and they said that they felt threatened, that they felt as if there was something wrong, but they didn't know what was wrong. And it was a universal sense that people got when people are separated from this natural environment, EM environment that we live in. Things happen.
Wow.
And so I think that that's kind of what's going on in this binary system, assuming we are in one, that as we're very distant from a certain point in space, there's a positive influence, a sweet influence that is sort of lacking. And then as you get closer, just as you get closer to, say, a radio tower as you're driving in your car, you get better reception. And so, in effect, our planet is driving around a huge track, and we're going closer to and farther from a radio station, which has beneficial effects for Earth.
Oh, that's really interesting. So there's a number of things that we can tie this in with. Obviously, we have the question of the weakening magnetic field of Earth itself. That seems to come and go, and I've at least heard that apparently in the last couple of years or so, or maybe 10 or 20 years, I can remember exactly, we're talking about large, big cycles or big timelines here, but that the Earth's magnetic field actually has been weakening. Do you know if that's true or not, Walter?
I've read that information, but I really don't know too much about it because I haven't done the research firsthand. We do know, Henrik, that the magnetic pole of the Earth will wander, and it wanders anywhere from about 10 to 40 kilometers per year. So its location changes just slightly. And we do know from geology that, you can tell the polarity of stones, that the poles have flipped now and then, magnetically flipped, not the Earth flipping over or anything, but just the magnetic change. And this has, definitely occurred because you can see it in the rocks by polarity. So I wouldn't doubt that it changes from time to time. I think the average somebody said was like every 600,000 to 700,000 years it seems to flip.
And so, what are some of the parallels here if we talk about some of the civilizations that seem to have come and gone? There's various ones in South America. There's various ones in Europe, maybe even North America and Asia as well. What are some of the most interesting kind of correlations here that you've found, Walter?
Well, that's a good place to sort of back up to and really put some foundation on this hypothesis. So ancient cultures around the world spoke of this vast cycle of time with alternating dark and golden ages, something that Plato called the Great Year. And if it's true, as all these cultures talked about, then we would expect to find evidence in the archaeological record of higher ages, before the Dark Ages, and then higher civilizations, and then lower civilizations as you go towards the Dark Ages, and then as you come out of the Dark Ages, higher civilizations again, more advanced cultures. And that is indeed exactly what we find. And just to mention a few, if you look at Mesopotamia, very advanced knowledge of astronomy and water system, hydraulic engineering, great knowledge of geometry and mathematics. This was back in ancient Sumeria, and then Akkad was a little lower, Babylon was a little lower than that, and by the time that you're approaching the classical Dark Ages, which most scholars would say starts around 500 AD or so with the fall of Rome, that civilization in Mesopotamia has gone all the way from being the greatest on the planet Earth to being actually nomadic. They've gone to nothingness. Same thing in the Indus Valley. Tremendous. They actually had indoor plumbing and heating in many of their buildings, which were built with uniform bricks. They had municipal water systems. Just a very advanced culture, a type of writing that we still don't understand today. And same thing, went to just dust, a nomadic culture. And all around the planet to greater or lesser degrees. China is one that some people say, oh, didn't they buck the trend? And not really. If you look at ancient China and their knowledge of astronomy, their knowledge of geometry, and their ability to build these very fine pieces of jewelry that have been found in stone sculptures, it would have taken some kind of a diamond drill to make many of these things, and that knowledge completely goes away to by the time of the Han Dynasty, which is sort of on par with the Roman dynasty. Things have become very brutal, and they've lost much of their ancient culture. And even in Central America, there's evidence that the Olmec were quite advanced. The Maya were less so, and by the time the Maya got to their Dark Ages, they're practicing things that aren't much better than the crucifixions going on in Europe. They're practicing, human sacrifice. And so the whole world seemed to have declined from the sort of the higher ages long before the Dark Ages. And then we wallowed in that for roughly 1,000 years, and then we had a Renaissance, which of course means rebirth in French. And then with this Renaissance, knowledge has been gradually expanding. There's still a lot of Dark Age influences in culture, to be sure, because many of the institutions that exist now were born, back in the Dark Ages. But we're slowly breaking away from them, and there's a lot of talk about consciousness now, and really understanding that knowledge is growing, and this whole technology phenomena is a little bit of a manifestation of our cleverness, if you will. And so I think we're slowly expanding, and so the depths of the Dark Ages, which some of the Indian writers put around 500 AD, happens to fit just beautifully with what we find in the archaeological record. So
are the peaks and valleys of this, are they on a balanced frequency? Do they happen recurrent for, let's say, with about 1,000 years between them, or is the pulse of this much more difficult to track, Walter?
No, because it's not difficult to track. Astronomically, at least, it's not difficult to track because we can see the stars move across at the rate of roughly 50 arc seconds per year. At that rate, it takes roughly 26,000 years to complete a cycle. And the ancient writings on this say, it's 12,000 years up, 12,000 years down. As a matter of fact, that's where our current system of time came from. 12 hours of AM and 12 hours of PM is a little microcosm of the great year. But it is difficult to track in the archaeological record because, nothing lasts for more than 5,000 years or so, unless it's just made out of massive, massive stone.
Right.
And then you might still find some of the stone. But so, yeah, any more than about 5,000 years ago, we just don't have much information. But the information we are finding, like Egypt being at its height near the very beginning,
Yes,
does seem to be indicative of this great cycle.
that's really interesting. And I just wanted to add here. I mean, I don't expect you to verify if Atlantis is out there or not. But in one way, what I wanted to ask you is, to you then, in that sense, does it make more sense that we've had high cultures in the past that totally have potentially vanished that we don't even know about today, Walter?
Yes, it does. Yes, and so these, this myth and folklore about Atlantis or Lemuria could well be references to long-lost civilizations. The Greeks would say, that this has gone on for hundreds of thousands of years, these cycles, and the Indians would actually say it's gone on for millions of years. We've had these cycles. But it's very difficult for us to understand, what a higher age might be like, because, our current mindset is pretty myopic. We tend to think, oh, okay, if we have cell phones and computers now and we didn't have them 50 years ago, then a higher age should have cell phones and computers. And, it's just a ridiculous notion that a different culture is going to express their higher consciousness in the same way that we are now expressing ours. Not that we're anything close to high consciousness. But it reminds me of, if you went back to a farmer just 100, 200 years ago, and you told him that, hey, we now have robots walking around on the surface of Mars doing scientific experiments, and we all carry around little mobile devices so we can instantly talk to people in China, and we can clone your farm animals too, and plants. He wouldn't relate to it. It's not just that he wouldn't understand the technology, but he wouldn't even understand the purpose. Right. Of, why are we on Mars? Or why do you need to talk to somebody in China? Do you speak Chinese? And what's wrong with the animals? Can't they reproduce themselves anymore? It just totally wouldn't relate. And that's just a couple hundred years. And so how are we going to relate to a higher age, what life might be like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years from now in the future? I don't think we have a clue.
It's almost like when you're describing that, because it's a good little micro analogy. If we do that on the bigger scale, it's almost like we're talking potentially about a different species, at least in terms of the mentality. Then, right? That's a good way to look at it. Yeah, what's so fascinating here, Henrik, is that the ancients broke this cycle into segments because different epochs are so different from each other that they had different names for them. And so let me just give you the Greek and Indian take on this real quick, if I could. So the Indians break it down into the Kali Yuga being the darkest age, the Dwapara Yuga, the Treta Yuga, and the Satya Yuga, the Satya being the highest, the golden age. But let's use the Greek terms because we're all much more familiar with them. The Iron Age is the lowest, equal to the Kali. Then comes the Bronze Age, then the Silver Age, and then the Golden Age. And the Greeks had other names for these, which they called the Age of Man, the lowest Iron Age. Then the Bronze Age was considered the Age of the Hero, when man is starting to wake up and, begin to realize who he really is. And then the Silver Age he called the Age of the Demigods. And this isn't something like the movies say, where a human mates with a god. It's actually where a human starts to realize he's a god. And then the highest age, of course,
they call it the age of the gods. And, many cultures talk about these different epochs and this way that consciousness changes, including, Christ himself, who he was quoting the Old Testament when he said, "Is it not written that ye are gods? These things that I do, ye shall do also, and greater things."
Right. Yeah.
This is a guy you can believe, I think. And so it's talked about in virtually every culture, and I think we can understand the material age because, that's what we're in. We're just barely coming out of it now. When we begin to, the Indians, we say we begin to discover finer forces, is what they call it. And sure enough, and this was written thousands of years ago, and sure enough, as we start to come out of the Renaissance, what do we discover? We discover electricity and magnetism, and we realize that everything's made out of molecules, and molecules are made out of atoms, and atoms, seem to be made out of almost nothing. And matter of fact, string theory would say it's just, vibrating energy.
Yeah.
And so we are indeed beginning to discover that this universe around us that we had thought is so darn material, so darn heavy, is indeed, made of energy, and we have much greater possibilities, which we're beginning to express through our technology, but in the higher ages we express in far more eloquent ways.
So where would you suggest that we are on the scale? Are we approaching into the silver age maybe, or are we already there? What do you think?
No, we're just barely out of the dark ages. So if you draw a clock, say with 24 hours, and from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock you have you go down, and at 6 o'clock at the bottom of at the very bottom. So I'm just using a 12-hour system here.
Sure.
6 o'clock at the bottom, that would be the Dark Age, so that relates to about 500 AD. 498 is what some of the texts say. We're just barely about 6:30 a.m. We're on our way up, but we've just barely crossed the darkest point of the Dark Ages. And then 12 o'clock up there last occurred in 11,500 BC. And, will next occur in, let's see, another 10,500 years from now. So what is that? 12,500 AD.
Sheesh. Well.
But let me give you just, say, one marker along the way so you can kind of relate to it a little bit. If you go back to, say, about 3,000 BC, when we're just beginning to build the first ziggurats in Mesopotamia, the first pyramids in Egypt, this sort of thing. And we find myth and folklore there that, writing is just beginning. And some of the first writing talks about a time when mankind spoke with one tongue, when the earth lived in peace and harmony. Hesiod talks about these things, but there's biblical mentions of these things. And we tend to dismiss it as, oh, that's just myth. And then, when we're building the towers, God confuses the tongues. And so, the world, a few thousand years, falls into chaos. Supposedly, now go forward to about 4100 AD. It's when we go into the next higher age, into the Silver Age, as you mentioned. The saints and sages that write about this and understand these cycles say that once again, man will have a universal knowledge of clairvoyance and telepathy, like they did in a pre-Babel age. So it's indicative that you can see that, if any of these myths are true, then we really did have just a whole different way of living, a whole different way of communicating. And, we're sort of muddling through the darker ages now, just coming out, and in another few thousand years from now, we'll have a whole different way of living, a whole different way of looking at things.
really interesting. Do you think that the fall that's mentioned in the Bible could be another analogy? Obviously, it's more of a slow descent than if we follow this 12-year the clock version of this that you mentioned. But do you think that it's related to that we're falling out of grace, so to speak? We're becoming something else than what we have been previously?
Yes, exactly. I think this whole all this mythology about a fall, and there's a wonderful book written by Steve Taylor called The Fall. I hope you can have him on your show someday. He's in England.
Mm-hmm.
But he really details about much of the mythology, and he would say that we're sort of going from a where we're kind of very connected, almost an animal instinct sort of sense, but of a high character, to where we go into ego consciousness, very disconnected, my, me, mine, very material oriented culture. And then slowly we begin to realize, hey, we're all part of one organism, and you kind of get it back together again. But yes, I do think that all these mythological references to a fall refer to that, and one that I really love reading about is the Babylonian references.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with an author by the name of Stephen Mall, by any chance?
Don't recognize the name. No.
Okay, he's another guy you might want to have on the show someday. He's the foremost Assyrianologist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
He won the Leibniz Prize. He's read more cuneiform tablets than anybody out there. And, there's hundreds of thousands of these tablets, probably millions more broken up in the desert, turned to dust. But and when he says read, he takes the term very lightly. He says, we really don't understand these cultures, but we can make out some of the terms and kind of interpret it through our own eyes. And what he's noticed is that about 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, throughout Babylon, there, Mesopotamia, the Akkadian culture is very much aware that they're in a declining age. They're looking back at the Golden Age, trying to preserve as much as they can. Matter of fact, they practice archaeology, and when they find a structure that's 3,000 to 5,000 years old to them, they try to preserve it in such a way that they, quote, don't change it by an eyelash, end quote. So they see something almost sacred in ancient things, and they're trying to preserve it. And yet all their writings talk about, they're lamenting the days ahead. And Stephen Mall, he's actually a great etymologist. He, studies the language, and he's made an amazing discovery and found that the words that the ancients had for the past have become our words for the future. And their words for the future have become our words for the past.
How about that?
Yeah, and what the point here is that we seem to orient ourselves in time based on where we are in reference to the Golden Age. So for them, the Golden Age was closer, it was in the not too distant past, and they knew they were declining and fearing the Dark Age they were going to go into. And so they considered themselves, if you will, sort of going into the past or going backwards. And whereas us, we've seen the Dark Ages. Just 500 years ago, every nation was at war with one another. And if you go back 1,000 years, lifespans are half what they are. Plagues are ravaging the world. Every duchy in every county is at war with one another. We don't want to go backwards 1,000 years. We want to go forward, and therefore we have these different terms for things.
That's a really, really, really interesting way of looking at it, and I couldn't agree more. It's like just an instinctual feeling of the fact that as we're digging into the past. In many cases, it's like we're looking into the future. Just an intuitive feeling I have in one way, and to hear this in terms of Stefan Mahl that you mentioned then about the Acadians is indeed very, very interesting. And it's almost like they know then that they're going into oblivion, and one way of preserving maybe some of this knowledge can be done through architectural means as well, I guess then, right? Building structures.
Oh, yeah, beautiful thought, Henrik. There is just there seems to be almost a frenzy 5,000 or 6,000 years ago to build these massive structures. They're hanging on to something, and there's a lot of different theories about why this was done. Just an aside, when I was a kid, I heard about Stonehenge, and they told me, oh, this was a structure built just when mankind was going from hunter-gatherer to agriculture. Mm-hmm. But he didn't know when to plant his plants, and so he needed to build a calendar so that he wouldn't forget and could harvest them at the right time also. And I bought into that when I was a little kid, and now I realize how absurd that is to, if we have the technology and the time to go quarry, 50-ton stones and drag them and build them in a perfectly astronomically aligned structure, we're definitely not starving.
Yeah, exactly. But we can't remember when to plant a seed or not. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So I do agree with you. I think these ancient megalithic architectures have a purpose, and I've got a couple of theories, but I don't think anybody really knows right now exactly why they were built.
I mean, again, it would imply that again they possibly could do things in the past that we can't do today, like again the building of some of the pyramids out there, and again the stellar knowledge that we only now are being able to verify. Allegedly, for instance, did mankind forget that the planet was round? When this seemed to have been known in the past, and all of a sudden it was flat. You know what I mean? This is very weird. Why this is happening?
Exactly. Yeah, all this knowledge that we had disappears and then comes back. For example, put this in your mind. Use this 500 AD as your low point. We know that Aristarchus of Samos, in about 500 BC, wrote about the heliocentric system. Because we find mentions of that, and even Archimedes taught this system for a period of time. And then the heliocentric system being, that the Earth goes around the sun. And then this knowledge is completely lost into the Dark Ages. And when does it come back? It comes back in 1483 with Copernicus, 1,000 years after the Dark Ages. And so it was lost 1,000 years before the Dark Ages, found 1,000 years after the depths of the Dark Ages. And, I think it just shows this great evidence of, what is lost will slowly come back, but sort of everything in its time and season.
Absolutely. And how do you reckon that for instance, the Ice Age play into all of this as well? Things like, you talked about, for instance, light before, and maybe we can even connect that with heat or actual, radiation from the sun, our angle obviously as well. And we seem to, Ice Ages seem to come and go as well on the planet. Does that have a relationship with all of this, do you think?
Yes, there does seem to be regular ice ages that come and go. That's pretty well verified through the ice core records. And Milutin Milankovitch, he was a Russian scientist. He wrote quite a bit about this and showed that it tied very closely to this precession of the equinox. And so, this warming and cooling on a global basis does occur in sync with this celestial motion. But I don't know that, exactly how much it has to do or doesn't have to do with the higher ages, because actually it appears that the higher ages correspond to a time when we have more ice on the Earth rather than less ice on the Earth.
All right. Do you also think that maybe some of the features from the past and building structures, pyramids, or even inscriptions and things like that are around, that we progressively might understand them better as we kind of regain this consciousness of old as we go into the future, so to speak?
Yes, I do. There is some work being done by a scientist friend of mine, John Burke, who happened to just pass away, unfortunately. But it's absolutely brilliant. And what he did was he took well, he did many things. He's been to over 81 ancient sites where he took electrostatic voltmeters to virtually all the pyramid sites in Central America, the ancient Mayan and pre-Mayan sites. And he also took a magnetometer to some of the henges. And so let me tell you about his work at Avebury. Avebury, as you may know, is the largest stone circle in diameter in England, in the world really. And it's one that there's 66 stones that still remain. And they're big, massive stones and very hard to move. And so he just sort of intuitively thought that, whoever put these here must have done it for a reason, because it took a lot of work to do that. And so he wanted to see what the polarity of the stones was. And remember, we were just talking about how the geologist can tell where the Earth's poles are based on the polarity of a stone.
Mm-hmm.
When a stone is formed by the Earth, the side that faces the North Pole will be the positive side, and the side that faces away from the Earth towards the South Pole will be the negative side. And all stones have a little magnetism.
Exactly. Is that the magnetite in the stone that aligns itself depending on where the North Pole is? Is that how it works?
I actually don't know what it is within the stone, but obviously all stones have some magnetism to them. And of course lodestones, it's very obvious where north and south is, because you can tell which side attracts and which side repels.
Yeah.
But most stones, the magnetic the amount of magnetism is so light, it's not much more than the Earth itself. The Earth is one big giant magnet, but only about 0.6 Gauss or so. And but anyway, what he found, he took his magnetometer to the 66 stones at Avebury and found that each of the stones was aligned so that its positive face faced the next stone in line, meaning the negative face also faced the next stone in line in a reverse pattern. So let's say let's use our clock diagram. The stone in the 1 o'clock position, its positive side faces the stone in the 2 o'clock position. The stone in the 2 o'clock position faces the positive side of the stone in the 3 o'clock position, etc. So all the positive sides face one direction, all the negative sides face a different direction. And it's an absolutely astounding finding, because it means, one, the builders of this structure 5,000 or 6,000 years ago somehow understood the polarity of the stones, even though we've only been able to do it the last 100 years when we developed magnetometers. And two, what did they do it for?
Yes.
It's the same formation that you find at the Hadron Collider in Switzerland. Of course, we use that as a particle accelerator. That's what the magnets are for, to accelerate particles.
Right.
And I'm not saying that Avebury is a particle accelerator. I'm saying there's probably some other purpose, because it's weak magnets. But it's knowledge that we once had and we've lost, and we haven't even rediscovered yet.
So the circles here, basically, if we just reiterate that, because that's, I think, is very interesting. again, is like a minor replica of the large the Hadron Collider, because of the fact that the magnetic is it North Pole that is facing inwards towards the circle, so to speak? Then is that how it works?
It faces in a line.
Yeah.
So they're like dominoes. So the face of the domino faces the next one, and the side that has the white dots on it, faces one way, and the side with the black face faces the other way.
Ah, right. I see. Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's.
What's your speculation? What do you think the purpose of that is? Is it can it help to maybe heal the body or something, or has it to do with consciousness again? Perhaps that it's like it becomes a sacred temple for the fact that you can attain another level of consciousness, maybe inside this magnetic field. What do you think, Walter?
I really don't know. I'll tell you one sort of wild speculation, and I'm not hanging my reputation on it by any means.
Right.
But there is an old myth, and before I mention it, let me just first mention that in the lowest age, the material age, we're pretty much stuck. We move by our feet, or we ride an animal or a bullock cart, or we just don't change our place in space very easily or very quickly, and we certainly don't change our place in time. In the next higher age, the Dwapara Yuga, the one we've just come into, the Indians also call it a time when we annihilate space. And if you look at our inventions just at the beginning of this, since the Renaissance, the beginning of this new age, we have cars and airplanes and jets and rockets and satellites. We can move very quickly from one side of the planet to another. Or, through computers and cell phones, we can move electrons very, very quickly, instantly, from one side of the planet to another. So you begin to sort of annihilate the limitations of space. Well, in the next age, they say that you begin to annihilate the limitations of time. And so nobody really knows what that means yet. But one myth about some of the stone henges in Africa that have survived, there's a story about a person standing, two people outside of a stone henge. One person goes in and disappears, and the person standing on the outside waits for them, and finally the person reappears and comes back outside the stone circle, and the one that had been waiting says, "Hey, where did you go?" And the one that was in the circle said, "Not where did I go, when did I go? I went to a different time." And so, again, I am not saying this is going to happen, but I'm saying it's one piece of mythology that sort of fits with some of the Indian mythology that would suggest in the higher ages we even have the ability to overcome the limitations of time somehow.
That's really interesting. Walter, why don't we take a short little break here and then continue for more in our member section. But again, tell our listeners how they can get your websites, obviously. Mention your book as well, and also your upcoming talks in the UK again for people who want to come and see your presentations there.
Yes, I'll be at the Megalithomania in the UK, and one can get that just by Googling Megalithomania, and that'll be on May 9th. And also be at Conscious Events on May 6th in London. My main website, and I hope we can talk about a little of the basic research here when we get back, is binaryresearchinstitute.org, because we think it might be related to the motion of the solar system. And, just by way of background, I was always interested in astronomy and archaeology when I was a little boy. And so I've just constantly studied it. And even though my main career was in research of another nature, mostly of high-tech companies in the venture capital and investment banking business. When I retired from that, I got straight back to my research of astronomy and ancient cultures, and that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so. And I must say that the discoveries that have been made in the last 10 years or so are just, sort of rewriting the history books, and also the discoveries in the areas of astronomy, too, seem to be going at a very fast pace. So
yes,
it's quite an exciting time to be in this business.
Absolutely. So many things are changing, and new things are coming online, so to speak, as well, all the time. For instance, there was a news release here by NASA. Was it yesterday, I think? Yeah, it was yesterday. By something they call First Light. This is the SDO, the Solar Dynamics Observatory. They managed to capture some incredible high-resolution images of the sun. Don't know if you've seen this yet. Are you aware of that, Walter?
It came into my inbox on the email, but I actually haven't opened it yet, so I look forward to reading that.
Absolutely, because obviously why I'm bringing it up is that if we indeed get very high detailed images of the sun and so forth, we might be able to see if indeed things are hanging around the sun as well. If we can see something in the background, depending on orbits and timing, of course, of all of this. We'll get into some of this later, but in terms of finding and we are going to continue on the theme of solar system anomalies here today. We've been talking in the past about various things, like, for instance, Planet X catastrophe in the past, and how this might be linked with unknown bodies in and around our solar system, sometimes with the speculation of incoming things. But we have Walter Cruttenden with us today from the Binary Research Institute to talk about the possibility that we are actually living in a binary star system. And we're going to also talk about the cyclical rise and fall of civilization. The question here is if our sun basically has a companion. NASA even believes so. They call it the Nemesis. They're looking for it. A while back they released a news article yet again that they do kind of regularly about this weird phenomena. Seems to be a force out there, so to speak, which seems to support this particular theory. Walter is an amateur theoretical archaeoastronomer. He's been doing research on the celestial mechanics of the precession of the equinox, as well as myth and folklore related to this phenomena. He's also the author of Lost Star of Myth and Time, and there's a few websites here I want to give out to you guys as well. First, check out binaryresearchinstitute.org and also loststarbook.com. That's specifically more about the book Lost Star. Walter is also behind the Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge, CPAC. And now in May, he's going to head over to the European continent and doing a few talks in the UK, among other places at Megalithomania and another Conscious Awareness Expo or conference as well in the UK. And we'll talk more about this later on. I'll give you guys a heads up on that. But with that, welcome to Red Eyes Radio, Walter Cruttenden. We're very excited to have you on the program with us today.
Hey, Heinrich. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Really good to have a brown dwarf or a companion to the sun. How likely do you think that is? Do you think we'll ever get a photograph of it, so to speak?
Well, if the sun has a brown dwarf companion, I'm sure in time that we would discover that. Because our equipment is just getting better and better all the time. In my book, Lost Star, Myth and Time, I get into this idea that our sun might have a companion, and it is something that, mainstream astronomers have talked about as a way to explain, regular extinctions of dinosaurs and things like that. And so there is a group that's looking for a brown dwarf with a very long cycle phenomenon. And those people are at UC Berkeley, Richard Muller, as well as Whitmire and Matisse at the University of Louisiana and some others. But I'm more interested in a shorter cycle phenomena, which we can get into in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I'm really not so certain that it's a brown dwarf we're looking for. And that is one of the scenarios: a brown dwarf, maybe a red dwarf towards the galactic center, maybe even a black hole. those are all sort of in the dark star scenario categories, versus there are some, bright star categories, things that we see with our visible eye that we just have not observed carefully enough to realize that we are moving around it over a very long period of time.
And how long a period are we talking about?
Well, all our work indicates that
here. And why don't we begin, just talk a little bit about your upcoming appearances over in the UK here now in May then. Megalithomania, we had the founder of that on our program before, Hugh Newman, and you're heading over there. Have you been there before, or is this your first time over there?
I've been to England several times, of course, but I've never been to the Megalithomania conference, so I'm looking forward to that. And that is on May 9th that I'll be there, but the conference runs through that whole weekend with events before and after it from May 6th to May 10th. So it should be pretty exciting.
Excellent. And then you have another one upcoming in London as well. Tell us about that.
Yes, a few days before, on May 6th at Conscious Events, and that's in London, 3 hours on the evening of the 6th. And so I think that can be accessed just through Conscious Events. You can Google that. I'm not sure the website offhand.
All right, we'll see if we can find that and link that up for the radio show as well. Something for you guys out there listening to check out if we're in the UK or around the area, and find the things that we'll be discussing here with Walter tonight as interesting, as it were. And so why don't we dive into it a little bit, Walter? Maybe you can just give us a brief little outline about yourself as well, when you got involved in studying some of these things, and what got you into it. That would be interesting to hear about that.
Yes, gladly. Heinrich, I work at the Binary Research Institute in Newport Beach, California, and that's where we study the motion of the solar system, its cause and consequences. And I'm actually sort of more interested in the consequences because of the tie to ancient knowledge. These cultures that talked about this rise and fall of civilization. And what we call the precession of the equinox, where the stars move across the sky at about 50 arc seconds per year relative to the equinox. Or another way of looking at it is the sun moves through the constellations of the zodiac at about 50 arc seconds per year, which means it takes about 2,000 years to go 30 degrees.
Yeah.
In other words, it's about 24,000 years to complete one precession of the equinox. You know, it's actually running a little bit longer at its current rate because it'll speed up and slow down. But so the periodicity we're looking for is something that can explain the precession observable, because we do not think it's adequately explained by current lunisolar theory. As a matter of fact, there's quite a number of problems with the current theory that we've written papers on and getting some traction on.
And how did you how did you get awareness of this idea? Was it through observation? Does it has to do with the mythological record, or was it something else, Walter?
Yeah, it actually began more with reading ancient writings, because so many ancient cultures had talked about this phenomena of the stars moving across the heavens, which we call precession, and they tied the rise and fall of civilization to it. And it wasn't just one or two. It's now been documented that over 40 cultures have this common myth that of a long-lost golden age that ages rise and fall. It's the Greeks term it the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age.